Hello, everyone. I am James, the novelist, and this is the Lit James podcast, where we discuss books and writing of African origin. For today's very special episode, we shall be discussing with the amazing Pemi Aguda. Pemi is a graduate of the MFA program of the University of Michigan, and since graduating, she's been a finalist of the National Book Awards, the Pen Faulkner Awards, and also the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for First Fiction, I believe. Yeah, and she's also been published in prestigious magazines like Granta and the American Short Story. Welcome, Pemi.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you for honoring this invitation. And today we are discussing a wondrously beautiful book called Ghostroots, a collection of 12 amazing short stories that I had to read twice because the first time was just not enough for me. Before we get into the short story collection itself, I'm kind of intrigued as to what the origin of a story is. What is the origin of a story? How does something become a story?
There's no one answer to that question, which is what I've discovered over time. Stories come from everywhere. Sometimes I'm listening to the radio and I hear something that triggers something else. Other times, some stories come fully formed. There's at least one story in the collection that I woke up from a dream and just wrote out in its completeness. Sometimes it's an image that I see out in the world that reminds me of something else. It's very mystical where stories come from. Like, it's hard to pinpoint exactly like where a story idea is born. I'm always delighted when sometimes I'll misread a sentence like in a poem, and that misreading gives me a story idea. Sometimes I'm watching a film. It comes from everywhere and nowhere at once. It's very mystical to me.
Hmm. So if they come from such disparate places, do you then keep like a daily diary or reflection on that you can then expand upon later?
No, I don't. I mean, I sometimes I'll journal, but my journaling is hardly ever about fiction. Do have, like on my phone, if I have an idea that I can't get to immediately, I'll just write like 2 sentences down. Or even if it's a detail, like a person is chewing gum in a very interesting way. That's not a story idea, but it could be a detail in a story, and then I'll write that down. So I do have a collection of these things that I go to once in a while. But I think the stories that really excite me, I don't even have to write them down. They kind of just stay in my brain for a long time until I have to put them down on paper.
Okay. That's a very good foundation. Talking about stories that stay in the brain. The first story in this collection, Manifest, stayed in my brain. I don't think I have read a story that starts with a dermatological uh with a dermatological sentence. It starts with a pimple. And
Yeah.
then we later find out more about Agnes along the way and her, I don't say not so kind mother, but it's a light-hearted story. It's pleasurable in the way it evolves along the way. It's funny at breaking speed, but it's also bleak. Can we read it as satire?
What would you say is satirizing?
I think it's in the way her mother sort of treats her.
Hmm.
You know, like, for instance, she calls her Agnes, which isn't like her biological name,
Yes.
or the name that she was given. And then along the story, it's also about how the struggle for Agnes herself, as she evolves and goes around her day-to-day activities within Lagos. It's like you are, should I say, making us see what she's going through, but at the
Mhm.
same time, making us see that things might have been different if maybe her mom had made certain decisions differently.
Maybe. I mean, so Agnes is the grandmother. The main character doesn't really
Yeah.
have a name, and then it's the grandmother kind of slowly displaces the narrator's self over the course of the story. I don't know that I didn't write it as satire. I don't think I was
Okay.
satirizing anything. I was interested in questions of just self versus inheritance. How much of yourself is truly you versus inherited by people who've come before you. And what's interesting is that when I was on book tour, when I went to Abuja to talk about Ghostroots, there were a couple of people in the audience who said that they'd had a similar experience where their parents kind of looked at them and called them by their grandparents' name because they were doing something that the grandparents would do that even the child wasn't aware that, like in our actions, sometimes we're just repeating history, even history that we are not intellectually aware of, but somehow somatically our bodies are echoing people who've come way before us. So if that's the situation, then how much of you is actually you? Like that was the question I was thinking about. I think more than satire.
Yeah, I think we can explore genetic components to this.
Yeah.
Because you said somatic expressions, I don't eat boiled yam, for instance, and yeah, and it was
You're
not
missing out. Wait, why? I
I
was
don't
thinking
know.
of having it for lunch today.
Like, I eat pounded yam, I eat
Okay.
crispy fried yam, but I can't eat boiled
Yes.
yam.
Why?
And I don't know. But then one time my grandma came from the village to stay with us. And then she said her father never liked boiled yam as well.
The story.
Yeah,
It makes
her
me
father
so.
never liked boiled yam.
What did hearing that do for you?
It didn't make much impact, until later on I went to medical school, I read genetics, and I saw how sometimes environmental situations can be passed into genes,
Mm-hmm.
and so perhaps some translation in some gene across generation passed through and then got to me, and that's why I don't eat boiled yams.
Mm-hmm.
I like how you said, yeah, it's probably a somatic expression of, something deeper. But yeah, it's clearly genetic. There's genetic expressions in.
But it didn't send you on an existential spiral, like
No,
in this narrator of this story.
it didn't, interestingly. But it made me consider that, yes, perhaps we, as much as we like to think that we are individuals and we are unique and there's only one of me and there's 1,000 of other people, we are at the end of the day a composite of all the genes that people before us have carried.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking about, I think, in this
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah. And nothing
Yeah.
about us is new, really.
Yes, it's
We're,
true.
we're just former people in a new age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, cool. So if we move to the next story in this collection, which is Breast Milk.
Yes.
Amazing story. Won the whole Henry Prize in 2022. You write about a woman struggling to produce milk while she at the same time is giving readers her interior about her inability to confront her husband's confession that he's been, so there's a physiological component to the reading, and then there's a sort of mental fight going on. How difficult is it to do both at the same time?
I don't think it was difficult. I think that's something that the first person narrative kind of affords you, is that you can be deep inside the interior of a character while also, but things have to happen, right? Like there's a plot that needs to be moving along because we are not just floating minds. We're inside our bodies and our bodies are experiencing things. So yeah, I don't think it was particularly difficult to do that combination in the story.
Is there something about the woman's inability to produce milk that you think might have been set off by her awareness of her husband's.
Absolutely. That's what the story is thinking about, I think. And like going back to what we were just talking about in terms of um what is absorbed, right? That's the question that she has. Like, is my inability to produce milk because I'm not expressing something on a psychological level. So that story was inspired by a lecture that I listened to by Ruth Behar, who is this anthropologist. She talked about her travels, and I don't remember what country. It was a country in Latin America, I think, where she visited, and she talked to this woman who said that 5 of her babies had died, and that she suspected that her babies had died because there was too much rage in her breast milk. And that story kind of stuck in my head. She believes that story. She believes that the rage in her breast milk killed her children. And that just sent me on like a dance. Like, what is that like when something that we have kind of confined to the psychological is expressing itself physically? Like you just said, like how the environment enters into the blood. Like this is what this story is also thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you give that example about rage in breast milk, because some years ago I read about a research that was conducted about women who were producing breast milk, and they tested the particular components of every breast milk from women who were in loving relationships, the level of immunoglobulins that were in each breast milk, from women who were in loving relationship, the husbands were dead during labor and all of that, and women who had been abandoned and who didn't have partners or probably had only family supports and everything. And the milk from the babies of those from a loving relationship had more immunoglobulins, which
What is that word? What does that
so
mean?
immunoglobulins are like proteins in your body that help you fight immunity.
Wow.
So from birth, the babies in the loving family had more immunity against common illnesses just from breast milk compared to the breast milk from mothers who had. It was a very interesting discovery for me. But yeah, I see how the rage in that woman's breast milk could have killed all her children. Absolutely possible.
Yes. I find it so interesting because like, what are the conditions for that rage? But yet there's a way she might blame herself for those children's deaths, whereas it feels bigger than her. It's just endlessly fascinating to me. Yesterday I was talking to a friend who had a baby recently, and she said that she talked to a few other mothers who couldn't breastfeed after the 6th month, mostly because they were so stressed. And I don't know, like I'm writing fiction. I've never been a mother. I've never breastfed. It's always still surprising to me how just real these stories are. I got a number of emails from women who said, yes, this was exactly my story. I struggled with breastfeeding because of some psychological reason. And anyway, it's interesting.
Right. Yeah, I'm not going to take it too much into the physiology of milk production, but one story that I find endlessly fascinating in this collection is contributions. So it's about Isusu, basically. It starts as a story about Isusu. These women come together, they contribute money, and it's quite common even here in the UK. I know doctor friends who gather money like that every month. They contribute £1,000, and then after 6 months, one person carries it, whatever. But this story starts as realism. Because what is happening is what usually would happen normally. But it sort of ends as magical realism, sort of. Because, okay, they collected the husband. That can happen. They collected the mother, but the mother is transforming into lizards and stuff. Okay, maybe she's a witch. Maybe they're seeing her as a witch. You know how we see like wall geckos and those kind of animals where we come from. Like, But no, body parts. No, this is magical realism. I think my question is, did you think of genre when you set out to write contributions? Or was it just a case of, of losing yourself to the creator's power of the mystery of writing?
It was absolutely the latter. I think that I knew that I wanted to write a story about this money, this informal money cooperative. My mother used to do this Esusu Ajo situation.
Ajo, yeah.
So I knew I wanted to write about that. I wrote that story at Clarion, which is this workshop for kind of fantasy and science fiction. I was one of the people whose work was closest to realism, always on the spectrum. But I think perhaps by bent of being in that space, I knew that what I was writing maybe could go to interesting places because of the environment I was in. But when I started that story, I didn't know where it was going. Absolutely not. It surprised me. And I love reading that story aloud, like at readings, because when the mother changes, there's always some physical reaction in the audience that makes me feel very, very satisfied.
Yeah. Well, how many of your stories are like that?
Most of them, I think, in the sense of not knowing where it's going.
Yeah.
Yes, I think most of them. I usually have a sense of something, either that it's the character or the setting or something I want to happen, but I hardly ever know where a story is going. And that's a joy for me. It's like not knowing where a story is going is what makes writing very exciting to me.
Cool. So another story that's a joint for me is Hollow or The Hollow, which first appears in Zoetrope, another O. Henry Prize winner. It strikes me as a story born out of deep loss. But there's a sentence I would like to read from there that I think you should. There is no gray zone with a house. It is all definite lines. How else could it stand? This reads like a structural engineer attempting.
Okay.
But then the story is also glazed with emotion. Like you wrote it lying down on the floor, pouring your intestines out, imagining you were in a house that raised you somewhere in Lagos. Is there anything personal about it from, say, your professional life pre-MF?
I mean, yes, I used to work in architecture. Yes, I used to be that person who would go to a house for what we call the as-built drawings. So when a house was supposed to be renovated, you needed to go in to kind of put down what already existed. And as the newest person in the office, I was the one who ended up doing that kind of grunt work of measuring. But that's kind of where the personal ended for me. It's a story that I think I felt quite accomplished by it when it was done because I hadn't written a story that did two different timelines before, the present and the past.
Yeah.
And actually, very old drafts of that story didn't have the architects in it. It wasn't until later on in my revision that the architect showed up and something kind of snapped into place when I understood that the architect is working through some kind of trauma of her own.
Yeah.
That is tangential to what the house is also trying to defend against, that everything kind of cohered for me.
I feel like it's a story that can accompany an art gallery exhibition. Yeah.
Exhibition, are you thinking?
Yeah, like so an exhibition about, say, the houses we grew up in.
Yes.
I feel like, yeah, that's the way I saw it. And I hope maybe someone can bring that to life, Yeah, like give me a picture or a portrait of, say, some house, maybe not a face, but a modest house in, say, Shita, and then get me paragraph from this story to accompany it.
Yeah, let's make it happen.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, yeah, it's true because I absolutely think that there are ways that buildings obviously just express history that we don't really pay attention to. And when I was in architecture school, it was all about structure. It was all about engineering, like you said. But afterwards, I realized I was more interested in this like abstract conversation about the psychology and sociology of being around buildings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll try to make sure that happens. I'll take you up on that. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, imagine me carrying you. My goodness. I paid so much attention to this story. I already imagined the woman there as Shola Shobawale. There is something quite 90s Nigerian TV about it. It's almost like you took an episode or a couple of episodes from Tajuddin Adekwetu's Everyday People and then short story-sized it, but obviously with better attention to literary craftsmanship, which is the celebration of this collection. It's what is possible when someone pays attention to the highest level of literary craftsmanship. That's what you've delivered. But the story is also multi-pronged in that it's not just about this woman who has inadvertently killed someone. It's also everything that comes up later on, as we get along. Her divorce or separation from her husband, the new wife, eating the new wife's food unknowingly, the struggling daughter who is quite confused, wants money from school fees, papa can't give it to her at the moment, could be a lesbian, likes rave, could be smoking. So much. It's an octopus. But still, the story is compact. It's like you didn't leave anything out, but the story is also compact. How did you manage to make it so compact without leaving anything out? I feel like you exhausted everything you could have been exhausted in that story.
Interesting. It's funny you say everyday people because the estate I grew up in, they used to film everyday people there.
I'm a genius.
They used to film it, not the outside scenes anyway, not the interior, but the outside scenes. And my sister and I would kind of hide in the bushes across the streets to see the shooting. It was very fun. I kind of like that you compared the two. I hadn't really thought about that. So I don't know, how does everything fit in? I think for a long time, I used to only write flash fiction, which, I wrote for the Naked Combos for a while. I don't know if you know that website back in the day. And I had to write a short story every week. Because it was flash fiction, a lot of my stories ended up just being scenes. So we meet just one scene, like one scene between two people. We don't really get much of backstory. We don't really get much of what could happen after that, but it's just one scene. But how can you write one scene that gives you just enough context for the story to have stakes, but doesn't overwhelm you with too much detail? And I think perhaps this particular story, Imagine Me Carrying You, is the direct descendant of those stories that I used to write because it's really tight, right? It's just this mom, for the most part, it's this mother and this daughter. It's a very, very, very interior story. And they're like trapped in this crucible of like the grief and frustration. But then for the tightness to have stakes, there has to be like enough things just outside that are impacting what's going on inside, which is kind of how all these things. But it's easy for me to tell all of this to you now, whereas when I was writing the story, I was not thinking quite consciously about weaving all these things together. As I want to write about the mother having an accident, it shows up on the page that, yes, it's the father that delivers this news. Or for the context of the daughter who wants to be both inside and outside, she has his friend who she wants to. So things like enter the story as they are needed. But then if it feels true, then it just adds another layer to the character.
Yeah. Interesting. And talking about things that feel true, 24 Alaji William Street feels true. Bogus, but true. What feels true? Bogus in the sense that, okay, did what happened in the Bible with Moses and, all the firstborn sons of Pharaoh happen? That's what I get from this story,
Absolutely.
But yeah, but also true in the sense that from an outbreak point of view, from a public health point of view, it is possible for something like that to happen. But would this pathogen that's killing these kids be so specific as to go after first sons? My point is that, I refuse to categorize it as magical realism. I refuse wholeheartedly. However, there's an almost invisible line where realism becomes magical. And I think that invisible line is what you have threaded superbly in this story, such that I have to think of influences. What could have possibly influenced, this ability to superbly thread that thin line? Are there like any stories or writing that you think influenced 24 Alaji William Street?
I can't think of any quite directly. This is one of those stories that actually I woke up from sleep and wrote beginning to end. I just kind of tapped out on my computer straight, just no stopping. So where did it come from? I don't know. My dreams, I don't know. Of course, it's true that I'm definitely influenced by so many people. This one, I'm not quite sure. It's not like easy for me to draw exact lines to where it came from, but it's, absolutely the Bible story of the Passover is definitely part of what I was thinking about, and it comes up
Yeah.
in the story itself. And I'm always curious about stories like what you just said that are kind of stuck in reality, but there's just like one thing that is slightly off. That's the space I love to be in. It's like very much our real world, but just one tiny thing is off, and that's kind of what sets the stage for the story. And so even a lot of, dystopian stories, I think maybe fit into this. It's
Yeah.
funny that this story came out the year before the pandemic, and a friend of
Mm.
mine sent me a message. I said, "Baby, what have you done?"
You set up you set you set up live viruses.
Yeah, but yeah, it's like the other day I live in Philadelphia right now, and because of the wildfires in Canada, we had really, really, really bad air. Like the air quality was very bad.
Mm.
I had to go somewhere and I was walking back home with a mask on my face, and the world was like a little bit orange and there was nobody on the streets, and it was very, very freaky. And I was so inspired. I'm like, now I want to go home and write a story about like a Lagos that is just suffused by this kind of strangeness. But it is not strangeness, right? Because it is real. Like, what can this quality of strange, because it's our world, of this thing makes it feel a little bit otherworldly, and that's kind of the space I like to exist in.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you said it's a word and the efficient of this thing makes it otherworldly, because some weeks ago I was listening to, and that was even before I approached you, I was listening to one of New York Times book podcasts, and they were talking about 100 Days of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, yeah. And there's so much superfluous, things that happen in the book. But there's a part in the book where Marquez talks about it was raining yellow flowers, for I think for days or weeks or so. And then this guy who also was talking about the book said there was a day he went to Peru, or a time he spent in Peru, and it gave him the feeling of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Macondo, because he woke up one day and there was yellow flowers everywhere.
Flowers or butterflies?
Was it butterflies? Yeah, I think it was butterflies. Yeah,
Yeah.
everywhere, and nobody knew where they came from, and everything just dissipated after like 2 days or so. But he was like, he didn't think Gabriel Garcia Marquez was writing magical realism anymore, because how astounding, for that to have happened,
Yes.
and for him to have experienced it.
Yes. I had a very similar experience actually. I was in Dakar, Senegal, and I was at a residency, and the studio was very high up, and you could kind of see the ocean from my window, right? It was this big window. I could see the ocean. And one day I look up and I just see like whiteness just like across the sky. And I was so confused. I'm like, I'm in West Africa. This is not snow. And also snow falls this way. This is happening this way. And I was so freaked out. I was so sure it was my imagination. I was like, finally strange things are happening to me because I cannot explain this. Am I dreaming this? But I looked outside the window and I saw there was a crow that was also looking like a bird, was also looking up. So I said, okay, me and this crow are having this, we're seeing the same thing. And I ran out of the studio just to see another human being who could corroborate that what I was seeing was actually happening. But then the whole building was empty. And so that even added to my, like, I was like, this is strange. What is happening? What is happening? After about 30 minutes, I eventually found somebody and I said, do you see what I'm seeing? And he's like, yes, but I can't tell what it is. And then later on, we found out that it was like butterflies were migrating. That was the whole experience. But I had
Oh,
never seen anything quite like that before. Just white butterflies streaking horizontally. It was so strange and magical. And between the time I saw it and the time that it was explained, that space is where I like to be, where it's just, in that
yeah,
moment, it was magic. Yes.
yeah. I don't want to know.
I
Like,
don't want to know. Exactly. Let me stay here. Let me stay here when it's magic. I love that. Yes.
all right, that was good expression. So, things boys do. These friends mistakenly murder their classmate, who is asthmatic, I think. And then many years later, they sort of reconvene, and it's kind of the stories that I would have been told in boarding house. So it made me think, or it made me wonder if you refer to anything in writing that particular story. Letters, family portraits, family laws.
No, it was actually that. It was that a friend of mine in university told me that there's something similar had happened in his boarding school. He went to one of those federal government boys' colleges, and he said, "Oh yeah, somebody got locked in a locker and people went home for summer holiday or something like that." And I don't remember if he said the person died or if he was found way later and, he'd been traumatized, but that
Yeah.
kind of stayed with me. And something I love to watch is murder mysteries, and I always love the episodes where something in the past is what's kind of haunting people in the present, or it's what is instigating the mystery of the present, and that's kind of how all of these things came together. I didn't go to boarding school, but I'd love to hear people's stories. I kind of wish I did because it seems so endlessly fascinating.
There's stories for days. You don't want to know.
I
Like,
want to know.
there's stories for days. I was listening to some Instagram buddies the other day, London Instagram buddies, and she was like, Nigerian boys who went to boarding house in Nigeria have the best stories to tell. So it's possible that this your guy that gave
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. Bad woman. Very simple story. Felicity, born into a marriage of strife, grows older, leaves home, becomes quietly successful, but she's not a beauty. And she's one of those women that, despite what's going on in their immediate life, they are still always in the background. They are not noticed. People don't take much cognizance of their presence until this encounter in this market on this particular day. So it's a very simple story, but yet it's encompassing. Is it easier to write a simple story like Bird Woman compared to, say, Contributions or The Hollow?
Well, yes, with those two comparisons, I think Bird Woman came way more easily. Bird Woman is the oldest story in the collection. I wrote it very many years ago. So there is a way that, echoes back. Again, I told you when I was writing flash fiction where it was just like one contained scene. And this one isn't, yeah, there's like one main thing that happens in the middle of the story, and that's kind of everything. So in that sense, it's simple. But I think that there are simple stories that are also really hard to write. So I can't give like an all-encompassing answer and say yes or no. Bird Woman had read in like on a Nigerian website actually that a bird had flown into an electrical wire and fallen as a woman, as a witch, obviously, and then the police arrested her. And I was like, the police arrested her? Why are they arresting her? But what was interesting to me about that story isn't necessarily whether or not it was true that this happened. It was more like, what does that feel like if you could experience flight for the first time? And so with that question, then it became, what kind of person would appreciate this experience? And that was how Felicity kind of came to me.
Mm. So to be a woman who has been unable to fly all her life, basically.
I mean, there could be very different scenarios, but the one that I landed on was like somebody who feels, I think Felicity feels weighted by her body, right? There's a very physical heaviness to Felicity, and the idea of being able to fly kind of counters that. So, how does that person experience that levity for the first time?
And when I say a woman who was unable to fly all her life, I'm talking about what you just explained as well, in terms of how the mental component of herself has been completely weighed down by the physical
Yes,
constraint that
yes.
she experiences. Yeah. So And it's interesting that you mentioned when I was in Uniben, I went to University of Benin, I studied medicine in Uniben. There was always one woman, one old woman that about every 3 or 4 years, because I spent 7 years in school, obviously, for obvious reasons. It was 6 year course, but
Yes.
strike and all those things. Yeah. So about 3 or 4 times in that 7 year period, there was always one old woman in the news who was a bed on an electric pole and fell down. The bed has died or something, and the old woman is next to the bed, and they're like, this old woman, you be witch, oh, that kind of thing. And then they're almost wanting to, attack her. But then later, I learned that this woman have just, because you ask the woman, where are you coming from? And then they just start saying gibberish, they just start saying nonsense. Where did they come from? I don't know, my Peking, they just start saying nonsense. And sometimes the kind of nonsense they say, there's an eerie component to it.
Mm,
But they just have dementia. They've just wandered from their homes.
yeah.
So in a place like Nigeria where there's no care for the elderly, for people
Yeah.
with dementia who can just wander from their homes 6 hours away from where they normally live, it makes you think of how many of them might have in the past, suffered very harmful fates.
Yeah. Yeah.
Might have been stoned to
Because
death 100 years ago.
absolutely, because we imagine like the instinct is to, like, things we don't understand is to just like ascribe negativity to it. There's no generosity in that interaction. Yeah.
At all. At all. Girly, the most generous story in the entire collection.
Generous,
It's,
interesting.
yeah, and it's also my favorite. It's my favorite for how it combined high literature with casual colloquialism. So this girl, house girl, mom begs her to go and work with these people, basically, or gaslight or manipulates her, sort of, to go and work with this couple. They are not bad. They're not treating her badly, but they're not also the best employers. The entire system is kind of shrouded in, illegality, because it's sort of human trafficking. Anyway, she gets kidnapped by this woman in the market. She suffers some ridiculous things along the way. It is high literature in the sense that it reads like something I would easily encounter in one of those greatest American short story collections that I used to buy under Ojulegba Under Bridge many years ago. Yet, there are stories within the story itself that I think my grandma would have been telling me when I was 10 or 12. How do you combine such high literary outputs with such casual colloquialism? First of all, do you agree that it's a perfect blend? It's a perfect blend of high literary work with casual colloquialism, one. And if you do, how do you combine both?
Well, I don't know that I agree with that framing, in the sense that I don't know why they should be different.
Okay.
I don't know, could the stories we were told be considered high literature? And like, what happens if we take those like seriously for their literary merits,
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's how I feel about that. I remember when I was growing up, I was writing a lot of stories. I mean, and many people have this similar experience where I was reading a lot of British literature when I was younger. And so a lot of what I was writing felt just like continuing to exist in that world. It was just not anything like what was around me. And I think it wasn't until I read Edwidge Dantiker, who is this Haitian, do you know Edwidge? She's this Haitian American writer who wrote Crick Crack, which is a collection of short stories. And his stories are just about like women in Haiti who are like in the kitchen or just like living very domestic lives. But it was the first time I saw how you could take seriously the domesticity and like this, what you call like this casual colloquialism around you, and like these women were worthy of being heroes inside stories. And so I think with Girly, that voice just kind of came to me first, the voice of that story. And she's talking like so many people I know. And I think when you take these voices seriously, that's where the literary merit comes in. And I like a story that plays with other stories. I always love that. And how do we kind of adapt the stories that we've been told to fit with our own narrative in life is kind of what the story is thinking about.
Interesting. And interesting that you also talked about that domesticity from your Asian American writer. Because while I've not read her, but I get a picture that Amitan could fit into that as well. Have you seen Eyimofe?
Yes, I love that film.
Now, that is, in my opinion, the best film by any Nigerian anywhere on the planet since Nigeria became a country. Okay. Now, the story in Eyimofe is everyday. It's an everyday story. Girl wants to jackpot, man wants to jackpot, all those kind of things. Yeah. Girl uses a Yimbo boy, man is struggling, working in a printing press, of that. But the way it's told with high level craftsmanship. That Tejukul had to write a review on the New Yorker for it. That's how well it's told. And that's how well it's shot. Now compare that same storyline. You could see it in 50 Nigerian YouTube movies. And there's a complete difference. So I think that's what I'm trying to say.
I say, that's a good analogy. I love Eyimofe, and I agree it's one of the best. I just love how it's true, it's shot beautifully, and it's true that it's a real Nigerian story, but it's a combination of really good actors and really good directors. So yes, you're right. I see what you're saying. I guess my body's reacting to the separation.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's a combination of taking that colloquialism seriously while also being aware of capital letter S story.
Yeah.
Which is a combination of all my experience writing so many stories and just over revision, shaping and paying attention to the sentences.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Because you can write about Nigeria's Nollywoodness way of life without writing it like Nigerian Nollywood. That's exactly, and that's what you've done. You've written the Great Gatsby of boy loves girl, because that's the Great Gatsby story it's a story that's been there since the beginning of time. Boy comes from humble background, loves girl from rich background, can't get her, goes to hustle, comes back. I can tell you there's 500 Nigerian movies about that same storyline, Exactly, yeah. But what F. Scott Fitzgerald does with the writing about that kind of yearning,
yes,
it's still been talked about. Exactly, it's still been talked about over 100 years later, because it's not that there are not many stories about poor boy loving girl and then going back to hustle and coming back, but it's that the craftsmanship is just so graceful that we are not focusing on the plots, but on the grace with which the writing is grating the page of the book. Yeah.
You've won me over. Yes.
Right. So the ending trilogy, or the 3 stories that end this beautiful collection, The Wonders of the World, set in Ikogosi. Oh, what a beauty. What a beauty. There's a part that I like the most where, and it's something that I would have done too, because I was quite mischievous in secondary school, where the teacher is telling the kids about some mythical story on how the water became cold and warm. One boy says, Naso. Classic. You don't have to do much. Naso. That is linguistic excellence. In pidgin form. Then there's the Dusk Markets, which I personally call the Great Lagos Short Story. Because the last time I read high art about a market in Nigeria was in Benokri's Incidents at the Shrine, which was published 40 years ago. And I'm 1986. And I'm so in love with the dusk market that I just have to read a portion of it that I really find intriguing.
Please go ahead.
All right, good. The face is older now, lined around the lips, but that bulbous nose is the same. One eye is still bigger than the other. Shalewa finds her feet and walks towards this woman. This visitation from her past. Daring, she calls out, bumping against swearing passers-by. Daring Sola. The woman pauses, her eyes darting around for the source of this call. Shalewa tugs at her elbow, recoiling when her palms leave a streak of death on the woman's white blouse. Now, she notices the white blouse. Now, she notices the gold necklace. Now, she notices the woman's tightening grip on her purse. Daring Sola. Shalewa wants to confirm, but it is her. She is sure. Who are you? The woman asks. It's me, Shalewa. Aren't you daughter of Baba Deribigbe and Alaja? Who are you? The woman repeats, her mismatched eyes squinting now, taking in Shalewa's hair, her iro and buba, her black and scaly feet. It's me, Shalewa, she repeats. Remember Baba Sule, the mechanic? Not my father. I don't know you, the woman says, beginning to turn away. Now this is the part I love. But Shalewa does not believe her. It is Aderinsola with the nose and the eyes, the one who ran away to the next village for one night with a singer, flogged by her mother all morning when she returned. Shalewa is absolutely sure it is Aderinsola. Now this is the best part. They weren't friends, but she was there when the background of Shalewa's life was not just opaque strangers, but real defined people with lineages she could trace and stories she recognized. She was from the life Shalewa left behind, the life before someone showed up and convinced Shalewa that Lagos would give her more than the village could offer. My God, this part of this book is perhaps the most orgiastic reading I've had, but I don't want to dwell on that too much. Then there's masquerade season. So beautiful. Boy comes home with masquerade, mother begins to tap into it until masquerade becomes a skeleton of itself. Wonder. These three stories, they end this outstanding collection. Are there authors or stories that we should be reading, or I should be reading in particular, to be able to write as richly as you have done, not just in these three stories, but in the entire collection itself?
Wow. First of all, I should say thank you for reading that passage to me. It's always kind of delightful to hear my stories, like to hear my work read back to me, because I wrote that, but it's been so long, I sometimes forget exactly what I've written. And I'm like, oh yeah, Shalewa, yes, I remember her. Let's see. What's interesting is that I'm reading Benokri kind of for the first time right now. I'm reading The Famished Road, and it's so good. It's so good. And I'm kind of shocked that I'm only reading I did read, I guess not the first time. I read his most recent book, but it's very different. It's not set in Nigeria. Yeah, I read that sometime last year, and it's a very different experience from The Famished Road. And The Famished Road is so big and bold and imaginative and so Nigerian. And people read Ghostroots and compared it to Benokri, but it's only now that I understand, because it seems, I guess, like the dusk market, right? Like this feels, it could have happened to Azaro. Like this could have been in Azaro's universe too. So I think people should definitely be reading Benokri, even though I'm only just reading Benokri too. There are so many writers I love. I love like Leslie Mecca, Rima. I think I mentioned Edwidge Danticat. I love Samantha Schweblin, Mariana Enriquez, Laura Vandenberg, who writes very well, like the strange in the real, like very, very well. I love Shirley Jackson. Yeah, Angela Carter. There's so many good authors out there, but these are some of the people I love.
Okay, I'll definitely take that to heart and get all their books, and because I want to be able to write like this. I would definitely want to be able to write like this. And I think there are many people who have read this short story who probably thought to themselves that they probably would like to also to be able to, perform magic like this. Because this is magic. Yeah, because this is magical writing. This is magical
Thank
writing.
you. This is so thank you for saying all of that. I should say that I also I didn't know that I love sentences. Like it makes me so happy to write a sentence and to revise a sentence and to sharpen a sentence. And I think that the poets also always give me permission because poetry they just do unexpected things on each line. And I'm like, whoa, you can do that. You can do that. Poetry is also a good way to kind of get into surprising.
So, and on that note, we wrap up this episode of the Late James podcast where we've discussed with the amazing Pemi Aguda and her fantastic collection of short stories, Ghostroots. Join me in the next episode with another Nigerian writer, or rather another African writer, where we discuss books and writing of African origin. Thank you.